Welcome back, csc200, to ex12 SpongeBob insert database. And the last thing we did was displayed our database on a web page. And we've done that before, so it's not a big deal. But what we're going to do now is we're going to use our input form and add more characters to this. They could be characters from the show, or you could just make up characters if you don't know any more characters. Now, what we're going to do next is we have to use an insert statement, because so far, if you look back at our code, we only have a display statement. Remember, if you just do SQL, select all from characters, just displays our database. That's all that does. But if we want to insert something into our database, we have to use an insert into statement. Now, where would we find that? Well, actually, we did that before, and we did that in ex10. When we actually created our database, that's why I had you make this file, this SQL file in ex10. I'm going to open up that ex10 SQL file. And if you don't have that, you can create this yourself. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy right here at the end of this first one. But we're going to change all this stuff. And obviously I have to put a semicolon there, but we're only going to insert one at a time. So I don't need all of these. I just want this insert into statement. Now notice they do have these little back ticks. We could leave those in for now, because I think we're just going to change this part here. But I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to close it so I don't have too many things open. And I'm just going to put this right before this SQL statement. So I'm just going to hit a return, and then I'll just paste it. Now it's going to look funny because it doesn't have the right characters, and it's going to mess up some of your color coding. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to backspace right before this insert into. And just like this one, I'm going to make a variable that represents that statement. And I'll just call it, I'll use a $sign, because with the PHP you have to use $signs before your variable. I'll use a $sign, and I'll just call it insert, and then I'll use underscore SQL, and then I'll say equals. So kind of what I did there. Now you can see the color coding isn't the same because I don't have this whole thing in quotes. So I want to put this whole thing in quotes. So I'm going to put a quote there, and notice it changed everything else. Whenever anything changes, it means you probably forgot something at the end. So that means I have to go here and put a quote around here, and then also I want to make sure that I have a semicolon to terminate my PHP statement. So I have to make sure that double quotes are around this whole statement. Now we're not going to be inserting Squidward. We're going to be inserting whatever we put into the form, but this is going to be the start here. So this is our right statement. Now what we're going to change, and that's why we copied this stuff, we're going to put in the variables. So we're going to copy these things. So I'm going to copy this first, and instead of Squidward, I'm going to put first here. And it's the variable. And you will leave it in the quotes. You have to leave it in the single quotes. And then I'm going to go to last and copy that. Now you could type it in, but I figured it'd be easier not to screw it up by just copying and pasting. And I'll copy species, and I'll go down, and that'll be where octopus is. And then I'm going to copy gender, and I'll copy that, and I'll put it not where gender is, but where the M is. And they should have the single quotes on them. So that's set up. So what's going to happen is we're going to insert into our database the variables that we actually get from our form. And the variables we get from the form will be processed when we fill out the form, because whatever we get from those fields of our form are going to use these variables, and then it's going to pull those variables, and whatever we enter are going to get put into that database, and it's going to get sent onto the database because we're using an insert into, we're using a query. Actually, right now it wouldn't work because we don't have anything that's generating this statement. If you look down here, if you're not sure, you could look here and you could say, okay, here's our query, but what's making that query work? And there's actually a function that runs the query called mysqli query. And it's using the connection, and it's using the variable that represents the queries. And then it's taking that result and then using it to display all this stuff. Now, to just insert stuff, we're not going to have to make a variable that represents that. We could probably just use this part, but if you're not sure about where this is coming from or where I'm getting that from, what we can do is go to W3 Schools, and this will be easy, and I'll go to W3 Schools, and I'll go to Tutorials, I'll look for PHP, server-side PHP, and I'm going to go down to my SQL Database, and I'm going to look for the one that says Insert Data, because that's what we're doing. So my SQL Database and Insert Data. Now you'll see a bunch of different things here. You'll scroll down, you'll be like, well, do I use object-oriented? Do I use procedural? Now last time we used procedural, so we're just going to use that again. So we're going to use the one that says example MySQLi procedural, and again it's under MySQL Database and Insert Data. Now, we already did this part. Now notice it says SQL and we have an insert SQL, but we already did this part, so we don't need this. But what we are going to do is have this thing here. You can see here's the actual function that's going to actually generate that. And they even have an error statement, so we could use all of this. We could use this whole little statement here and just copy it. Now we already have everything else, so we're just going to copy that part. And again, we don't need this because we have this. I'm going to copy that, go back to here, and I'm going to put it after this statement. And I'll just put an extra return and I'll paste it. Now things are all kind of messed up here, so I'll bring this back out to the margin. And one thing we need to change here is because we're using insert SQL, make sure you copy this or just fix it and put it here, because we don't want SQL, we want insert SQL. Because we already have one for SQL down here. That's the display one, but this is the insert one. So wherever it says SQL, change this to be insert. So here's our insert query that's going to happen, and this is the actual function that's going to make that query generate. And then if it doesn't work, if something's wrong, you'll get an error here that'll show you an error message. And if it works, it's going to say new record created successfully. That's why I went up here and I put that extra space, because it's going to put this statement right next to that one if it works, and hopefully it's going to work. And that way it won't go right against the period. There's a little space there. We could have put it on another line as well. You could put a line break in there, but we'll just keep it on one line. So that should work okay. So we got that from, again, from PHP, MySQL Database, MySQL Insert Data, and it was the procedural that we used, and we just used the if-else statement. So if it works, we get a nice little message at the top that says new record created successfully, and if it doesn't work, we'll get an error message, and then we could go and troubleshoot. All right, so that's working okay, so I'm going to save what I have. And a couple things you want to check before we try this out is just make sure you had your quotes okay. Make sure you have quotes before this statement and quotes at the end. And make sure you have your single quotes in here. Make sure this thing ends with a semicolon. And here, make sure you change any of your SQLs to insert SQL. And that's from this variable that you used here. And again, this SQL is staying the same. So we are going to basically display everything from the table, but now we're going to add some records. So we have this saved. We have this saved, and let's just check this out, make sure this is ready to go, and that's going to display 12, so I think we're ready to go here. So we're ready to try this out and see what happens. So I'm going to go here, and also with phpMyAdmin open, we could also check and make sure it got added into here as well. So we're connecting to both of these. So I'm going to go back here, and you could go back to index, or you could just hit the back button and go back here. Now, if you hit the back button, I recommend refreshing. So it kind of refreshes. Now, again, we don't have form validation, so we don't want to have it blank. Now, we're going to actually insert something in here. Now, I'm not sure who I want to insert, if we want to insert another character. All right, I guess I'll put in a real character, and then you could just make up ones. But I'm going to put in Sheldon, and last name is Plankton. And he is a Plankton, and he's male. So that's all ready to go, and I'm going to hit submit. And what should happen, it should get added to the database, and it should show up on our table. So let's see if this works. And it says new record created successfully, and that works. You could put a period after there if you want. And it's now saying displaying 9 results, and it gave Sheldon Plankton a new spot in our table here. Now also, if we go here to phpMyAdmin, now it's not showing up here yet, but if you just refresh the page, and you ignore the errors, now we have him added to the database. So that's the way a web-based database works. When you do things with WordPress or anything like that, it's connecting to a database like that when you're adding content and stuff like that. If you ever worked with WordPress, it adds information to a database. That's where it holds all its content. Now here, what we did is we just added something to that database, and we're also going to do a contact form, which is one of the things you could do with a database, is you could have someone fill out a contact form and get added to a database. So let's try it again. Let's go back, and I'll refresh, and I'll put in another one. And I'm not sure if I know any other SpongeBob characters, and I'm going to put in Squilliam Fancyson, Squidward's rival, Squilliam Fancyson, and he is, I guess, an octopus as well. I assume. I don't know for sure, but I assume if Squidward is an octopus, he's an octopus, and he's male. So I'll put that in, and I'll hit submit. And that worked. Now we have our 10th element in here. And if we want to add another, we could just keep going, hitting back. Now, We're going to do more with this, but just for now, this is actually working. So I'll add one more. I'll refresh, and I'll put a female in there, and I'll just put Jenny. I'll just make one up here. Jenny Jaws. It's going to be a shark, and this is a female. And I'll hit submit. And now we have 11, which is Jenny Jaws. If I go here and I refresh, then we'll see Jenny Jaws in there. So that's what you want to do. So that's working. I think everything's working okay. It didn't take that long. And there's certainly many things you could do here. You could, show only certain columns. There's ways you can actually edit the form to display different things. You could still run queries that display only the male and female and stuff like that, because we're displaying everything right now based on our display query. Because remember, our display query in our display file is displaying everything. So it's just displaying everything, but you could certainly change that and display just female if you wanted to. We also don't have any validation right now, because right now we can just click without doing anything and it'll do that. So if you wanted to do something like just display it, it's not going to put anything in there. I guess if there's nothing showing up, if there's nothing in there, although you don't know if it'll put a blank one in there. It might put a blank one in there right now, so that's why validation might work. We could try it out just to see what happens. If I go back again, back button, and I'll refresh, and I'll just hit submit. And actually it didn't put anything. So that's part of the code that's in there. Oh wait, insert into, so it gave us kind of an error here. Now let me check this out, because maybe it put a blank one in here. I'll refresh this again. And it did not, so it didn't put a blank one in there, so that's good. It didn't do that, but it just it gave us kind of an error up here showing that we didn't put anything in there. So we can fix that with validation, but that's okay. So everything's looking good here, so I think we're okay. So that's going to be 12, and we're also going to do our validation. We might do that as our next one, and I might use an older video so I don't have to record a new video, because all that you'll be doing is, if you do that one, all that you'll be doing is just putting stuff in here, and it doesn't matter if it's an older video. It'll be kind of the same way in here, so I might just do that. But if you get this working, you're in good shape. If you got through 10, 11, and 12, we should be pretty much done with our SpongeBob stuff, and we could do another type of database after this, and we could do a contact form so people can add things, and we can kind of customize it a little bit more. But that's it for 12. So what you can do is you can just close this up. I don't have any challenges here. This is the challenge alone. You're just going to close this up, make sure it's saved, make sure this is saved, and you can close this up. And when you're done with this, I'll be able to go in and see this as well. So I'll see things in your files, I'll see things in your database. So if something didn't print out, I could at least look at your database and see what's happening. And what I'll do is I'll log out from here, and then I'll close that. And I don't need W3 Schools. And I'll go here, and I'll see your ex12. Just add a comment for your coursework for ex12 and let me know that you're completed with it, and then I'll check it out. I'll come into your workspace and check it out. Actually, since I had my SQL running, I'll put in quit, and it should say bye, and you shouldn't have to do anything else. And if I have no files open, I'm just going to close my container, and it should go back here. So I'm done. So that's it for ex12 SpongeBob database insert.